Good afternoon, everyone. It's 2:30, so I will call the August 24th meeting of the St. John Council Finance Committee to order. Just while we're waiting for Councillor Hickey to return, I do owe an apology to the committee and to Councillor Norton. The reason Councillor Norton is not here today is because his work week as a school principal has started this week. And when I talked with staff about the time for this meeting, being a teacher, I knew this was my last week off, and I forgot that he would be back at meeting. So sorry to Councillor Norton, but I promised to buy you a coffee and help catch you up on what you may have missed. So our first order of business is we have minutes from the July 15th meeting of Finance Committee. So I'll take a motion to approve the minutes. Thank you, Councillor Radwin and her worship. All in favor, aye. Contrary minded, carried. Next is the approval of the agenda, which has been circulated. So we'll take a motion on the agenda. Thank you, Councillor Radwin. Seconder, her worship. All in favor, contrary minded, carried. Item number 4 is the disclosures of conflicts of interest, if there are any. Seeing none, we'll carry on to the consent agenda, which is the pre-approval of bilateral and DMAF funding for the 2023 capital program. Could I have somebody move that? Councillor Radwin and her worship. Are there any questions? Okay, all in favor? Contrary minded? Carried. Which brings us to the state of item 6.1, the state of infrastructure report. I don't know why I look at my notes. And for that, I will turn it over to Commissioner McGovern.
Good afternoon, Chairman Sullivan and members of committee. With respect to the item before you, our SOTI report, thanks to the good work of many over a period of years, the City of St. John has been implementing a corporate-wide asset management program to support the sustainable delivery of municipal services. In 2016, the city, as many of you know, produced its first State of the Infrastructure or SOTI report. The SOTI report was then updated in 2018 after significant improvements in our quality of our data. And today, before you, we're here to present the third SOTI report, the 2022 report. Sharing this report publicly supports Council's priority of perform, where we're being transparent and accountable for the performance of the city's infrastructure. And with that, going to turn it over to Mr. Samir Yamin, our Manager of Asset and Energy Management. He will cover some material and then turn it over to the author of the SOTI report, Mr. Mike Benson, of a partner of DCA Consulting, who has been involved in this process with us from the beginning. And with that, over to you, Samir. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. McGovern. I'm very excited to present our third SOTI report. We call it SOTI report, which is a State of the Infrastructure report. And just before I hand it over to Mr. Mike Benson to talk about the result, I just want to bring to your attention a couple of things here is what is the purpose of the SOTI report and why is the SOTI report is used for here. The main objective here is we need to be transparent as part of our asset management policy. We need to communicate to the public, to the staff, as well to the council, what is the current state of our infrastructure, how much investment we need to do, how much capital investment we need to do in order to maintain our assets, such as road, water network, building, fleet, transit, park, and so on. Because the asset exists for only one reason, and one reason only is to provide level of service. And the second, we need to understand also what the condition of our asset, the risk associated with the asset failure. Because we need to minimize the risk and to ensure that we continue to provide a sustainable level of service. We need to understand what is our total replacement cost. The City of St. John has a significant infrastructure. And we need to make sure we compare our infrastructure replacement to other municipalities, just to put everything into perspective about the city of St. John and how much the staff are taking ownership of their asset. Also, we need to counsel and the public as well to understand what is the amount of our infrastructure deficit, which means that asset has already surpassed their life and they are in poor condition and they need to be replaced here. Also, this report will help also asset manager or asset department to help them make investment decision using scientific data instead of using other. So this is the main purpose of the report. Next one, please, Mike. And this report is data driven. It's important. So we need to ensure that any input to our SOT report is accurate in order to provide a good output data in order to help us make decisions. So how did we do the data? How we doing with the data? As Mr. Mcallister indicated, we've been working on improving our data for the last 2 years. We have conducted several building condition assessment on over 52 buildings in order to improve our data, to make sure we have good data. Our GIS have 95% of data has been mapped on our linear asset, road, water network, and city as staff are regularly updating the data. Thirdly, we have some data coming from various software, fleet software or parts and so on. So we have good enough data accuracy would help us to provide this SOT report. And the output of this data is very important for us to help staff to start developing their long-term financial plan, to have start developing their capital investment plan, to understand where the funding should be invested, to start securing funding in the future, to compare our data or our infrastructure with other municipality, and identify what area we need to invest in and what asset we need and which asset we need disposed. So there's a lot of information which can use by the staff to make a decision making and to develop all kind of planning. And hopefully what we plan to do here is, as part of our asset management system, we're looking to centralize our data instead of getting data from everywhere else. So this is our goal here. So this information is very important and we've been working hard to provide it as much accurate information. So Mr. Benson has been working, as Mr. Wagner indicated, has been working with us since 2016 on our asset management, and he'll be providing you the result of our 2020-22 State of the Infrastructure report. Mr. Benson, I'd like to hand it over to you right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yamin, and thank you to the committee for giving me an opportunity to share the results of the State of Infrastructure report with you today. I first just want to thank staff. There's been an enormous amount of time and effort preparing this document, tons of data and asset data. I think the city of St. John, you have over almost 80,000 individual records of assets, and so it's a huge effort by staff, and so I want to thank staff and applaud their time and their efforts for helping prepare this report. What I'll do today is provide a little bit of a high-level overview of what the results were. If you were to go into the report, and you'll see there are a number of different chapters, and you can find some fairly detailed data and information for different types of assets. But we'll take a step back today and really look at things from a very high level. First, though, I just want to illustrate what is in this SOT report. What are the different assets? And there's a lot. At a very high level, we've separated the assets into two categories. There's the general fund assets, and then our water and wastewater utility. You know, under general fund, you're finding everything from roads to pools to fleet equipment, Market Square, our fire facilities, street lights. There's a lot of assets in there. St. John Water, we're really focused on our drinking water, industrial water, and our wastewater infrastructure. So taking a kind of a step further into each one of these and looking again at the very high level summary results for each of these two categories. So first we have is our replacement value. And so replacement value is a really important measure. What we do here is we take every single asset that the city owns and we say, what would it cost to replace that like for like? So that's every road, every pipe in the ground, every building. If we were to tear it all down and build it again, how much would that cost? Now, of course, we would never do that in any given period. But what it really does is it helps us kind of give us a benchmark for how much infrastructure we actually own. And so with the general fund, we have $1.85 billion of infrastructure, and the St. John Water is comparable at 1.8. So in total, we're looking at approximately $3.6 billion of infrastructure. Now, again, that would be if you tore it all down and built it again, which of course we wouldn't do. But again, it helps us understand the magnitude and the scope of the infrastructure that we own. The next is the deficit. And the deficit is a really important measure. What this is doing is trying to estimate what is the backlog of capital investments that we need to make to take all of those assets that are beyond their useful life or are in need of immediate repair. What would that cost be? And in many cases, it's important to note that we're not going to always just necessarily replace an asset. And a road's a really good example. We may have built a road 20, 30 years ago, and the road is failing, it needs to be repaired. Well, we're not going to dig up the entire road and the entire base structure of that. What we can actually do is have more cost-effective maintenance or rehabilitation techniques. And so that's what we're trying to kind of narrow in that deficit value. What is the actual cost to replace all of these assets that are beyond? And so again, we look at the general fund with just under $100 million there. And St. John Water, though, is quite a bit higher at just almost $250 million. But I want to highlight, really important here with St. John Water, a very significant percentage of that deficit is actually being attributed to your combined sewer lines. And so combined sewers are pipes which convey both stormwater and sewage. So both of those fluids are coming into the pipe. And due to environmental regulations, there is a requirement to separate those. So even combined sewers that are in a good condition or are still functioning very well, we would still recognize that asset as being in a deficit. And that's over 50% of that deficit total is coming directly from our combined sewers. So we look at that deficit as a percentage of our replacement value. So for the general fund, it's at 5%. St. John Water, a bit higher there at 14%. But when we look at the letter grade, so the letter grade is trying to give us an overall sense of what the condition of these assets are. And so this may be a little bit confusing because we see that the general fund has a C+, which is actually worse than the B that we have for St. John Water. And that's because there's a bit of a distinction here. Letter grade, we're just looking at the physical condition of these assets. And so again, back to those combined sewers, we may have a large percentage of those that are actually still in good or fair condition. However, they are recognized as being in a deficit. So overall, we would say St. John Water's assets are in a better condition than the general fund. But again, the deficit value is still higher. We'll take another step into that condition here. So what you have on the screen here are condition distribution charts. So what we've done for every single asset, all 80,000 assets that the city owns, we've estimated what is the condition of that asset. And what we're charting here is the replacement value. So we've thrown all of those assets into a pot, and based on their condition, that will kind of determine the distribution here. And so we'll focus first on general fund. So one of the first things that I look for when I'm looking at these charts is what is the percentage of assets that are kind of in a fair or better compared to poor or worse. And so we do see, a majority of the city's assets, the general fund's assets, are in a fair or better condition. But when we focus in on that poor and very poor, and we add up the total value, we see it's about 20%. So 20% of the general fund assets are in need of repair or replacement, what I would call the short term, either immediately or in the short term. One thing I do want to highlight, though, is that you see here this very poor bar. It's at about $200 million. Now that's the $200 million of replacement value. It's not necessarily the cost to fix those assets. And so if we compare, that $200 million to the deficit, the deficit is almost half of that. And so that's for a lot of these assets. We're not necessarily just replacing them. Through some preventative maintenance techniques, we can take a road, move it from very poor to good or very good without having to completely replace it. And I'll compare that now to St. John Water. So again, we look, a vast majority of St. John Water assets are in a fair or better condition. In fact, very good is where a large majority of them are. And that total percentage there of fair, very poor is at 11%. But again, what's not being captured here is those combined sewers. And so while they may be in good, fair, or very good condition, they are still appearing on that deficit calculation that I showed you earlier. So that's important to keep in mind. The other important piece, one of the really important pieces of information that is included in the SOTI report is a long-term capital expenditure forecast. And so in previous reports, we used to do a 100-year forecast, and there's certainly lots of value in maintaining the 100-year forecast. But for this version, we've actually decided to narrow that in a little bit, and we've just looked 20 years ahead. Find it's a little bit more actionable. We can actually interpret those results and make decisions on them. 100 years from now, who knows what's going to be happening. But the expenditure forecast includes some pretty key pieces of information. I'll start first on the general fund. So first is this dark bar here, which is the deficit. So you can see for the general fund, just under $100 million. And then the bars that come after it, that's the total cost, the total capital expenditure that's being forecasted to occur in each given year. And so if we add up all of those costs over the 20 years, including the deficit, that's about a $507 million. And if we were to just spread that out over a 20-year period, that would work out to about $25 million per year. We'll compare that to St. John Water now. Again, we see this really large spike at the deficit, that $247 million. Again, emphasizing $135 million of that is combined sewers. And relatively compared, the forecasted expenditures are not as high, except we have this spike here in 2036. But we add up all of those expenditures over 20 years, about $537 million, which is just a touch higher than we had for the general fund, and we average that out to 26.8. So those are some of the big takeaways, the high-level information. Again, in the report, it breaks it down into individual service areas. So there's a chapter there for transportation, a chapter for growth and community services, lots of information there. As Brent, Mr. McGovern, and Mr. Yamin had mentioned, this is not the first SOTI report that the city has generated. And so because we do have previous versions, it's actually really helpful. We can take a look back and say, okay, what's changed since 2016 or 2018? And so I'll share a little bit of that as to what's happening or what has happened. So first is looking at that replacement value. And so we can see there's been a significant increase in the value of infrastructure that the city has. And this can be attributed to two main things. The first and probably the most significant is inflation. You know, we've seen the construction cost of a lot of your infrastructure, your roads, your water pipes, your sewer pipes, that has gone up dramatically, you know, in some cases 30%. So what you used to spend $1 million for, well, now you have to spend $1.3 million. So that's really driven up a lot of the value of your infrastructure. The other important piece that Mr. Yamin had alluded to is that we actually have a better understanding now of what the value of some of our assets are. Where previously some of the estimates that we had used had a very low confidence, but now we've done our homework, we've done the due diligence, and we have a much better understanding. And because of that, the value may have gone up. One example I like to use is Market Square. You know, we've seen the value of that building almost double from 2018. And that's just because we know more about the asset. We know how much it's actually worth compared to our previous estimates. The other important figure here is the deficit. So there's a bit of a story behind this, and I want to walk through it because it's important. So between 2016 and 2018, you saw this really dramatic shift in the deficit for the general fund and in the water and wastewater utility. You know, the general fund decreased by 100 million, but the water and wastewater increased by 100 million. And that change really was attributed to the data that was being used. In 2016, we relied on one set of data from the finance and accounting system. And then in 2018, there was an enormous amount of time and effort spent in gathering data and using a much more reliable set of data. We were able to really determine, to really narrow in what that deficit was. And so just comparing now 2018 to 2022, we've seen for both the general fund and for the St. John Water, that deficit is starting to come down. And again, we're using consistent data sources now. There are some minor changes, but I think what's really driving this decrease that we're seeing is that it's showing the work that the city has been doing in addressing its deficit. So this deficit is coming down. The other important piece here is that the the strategies that we are assuming that the city will use to replace and repair its infrastructure, we're getting a much better understanding there now. So an asset that we maybe had assumed previously that we were going to replace, we take a second look at and say, you know what, a replacement maybe is a little bit of overkill. We actually can come at this with a much more cost-effective strategy, and it's bringing that deficit down as well. But I think great evidence showing that the deficit has decreased over the past 4 years. The other piece as well is the average annual capital expenditures. And again, we do see a decrease here. So in terms of the requirements, the capital requirements that we're anticipating for our assets, kind of on an annual average, is coming down for the general fund. St. John Water, we do see that stay relatively consistent over time, even despite these inflationary increases, though, I'll add that. But again, I think this speaks to, as the deficit decreases, of course, the amount of money that you're going to need in the future goes down as well. The other important, this is maybe not necessarily a fair apples to apples comparison, but in 2016, 2018, we had that 100-year forecast, but in 2020, we've pulled that back to a 20-year. So a bit of a change there just in terms of the forecast. So some of the key takeaways or some of the numbers that I want to leave you with here today, first is 3.6 billion. So that's the total replacement value of your assets. The other number is 15%. So 15%, this is the percentage of your assets weighted by replacement value that are in a poor or worse condition. The next number is 346 million. So this is your total infrastructure deficit or the backlog for your assets. Again, both the water, wastewater, as well as the general fund. 52 million, that's the average annual capital expenditures that are being forecasted to maintain these assets, over the next 20 years. And I want to highlight that this is purely renewal as well. So this is replacing or maintaining the existing assets. And then last, that overall letter grade for city assets is a B-. So that's, again, weighing between the two categories there. One of the other things, and Mr. Yamin had alluded to this, is trying to kind of put into perspective how much infrastructure do we own as the city of St. John compared to some of the other municipalities. And so I will caution at the front end that some of this data is difficult to find, and it's often difficult to compare apples to apples. But we've done our best. We've looked at some of the other municipalities in Canada that do share this information publicly, and we see we've taken that total replacement value, and this is just for the general fund, and we've kind of put it on a per capita. So per person, how much replacement value do we have in the city of St. John? And we do see that, St. John does have a relatively higher per capita replacement value. And in particular, if we want to compare to some of the municipalities within the province, St. John is comparable to the city of Ottawa, city of Calgary, but you see if city of Fredericton and city of Miramichi, their values kind of on a per capita basis are much lower than the city of St. John. So again, I want to interpret this with a bit of caution because the data is fuzzy, but I think it does illustrate this sense that the city does own a lot of infrastructure, and there could be a number of reasons which are attributed to that. And so thank you. I hope that provides a little bit more information on the SOTI report. I'll pass it back over now to Mr. Yamin, who will share some of the next steps and recommendations.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Benson. It's good information, a lot of data. I love data, so data always good to make a decision. That's why it's good. So, our next step is for the staff. We want to continue improving our inventory. We need to ensure the data we have are accurate to help us in the future make investment decision based on scientific data. Continue performing condition assessment, and always try to improve our data management system. We are looking at putting an asset management system. When we tried to do this SOTI report, it took us a long time to gather information from different software, from Excel sheet, from GIS. So we hoping with the asset management system, we can be able to centralize our data, and so we don't have to lose information, and we keep updating this data. Okay, thanks. Next one, please. And the recommendation in the report, it's recommended that the 2020 State of the Infrastructure report be received and filed. Again, thanks again, and I will be happy to take any question from council.
Thanks very much. Questions for our presenters? Councillor Radwin, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I usually get really excited over Mr. Yamin's reports. This one I found a little bit scary, but very, very important. I think for me, it ended up being a very clear message for council to make sure that we're not overspending, because, you know, if we're not using our revenues in the right areas and watching to make sure that we are looking after our assets, then we could end up in quite a mess later. One of the, I really liked some of the reports that you guys brought up, but one of them that really kind of resonated with me, I just wanted to share, was the overall condition distribution chart, which is on, I guess it's considered page 21 of our council packet. And it really kind of got me thinking, because, you know, through $357 million worth of assets considered very poor and 203 million poor. And I started thinking, like, how far away are we from, you know, those fair assets or good assets becoming in poor condition? And I think that's where asset management and risk management comes into play, right? And being able to have a really good asset management system. So I really, really appreciated this. And it also got me thinking, you know, I know the Ernst & Young report had stated that that there was recommendations to possibly sell assets and sell pieces of land. And, you know, I know that some of that has been done, but just kind of throwing it out there as food for thought. Is that something that we should be doing? You know, so anyway, so I'd love for staff to keep kind of thinking outside the box, because maybe it is just too much to look after. I mean, when you're thinking that Little St. John has all of these assets that's almost in the same value as Calgary and Ottawa, it also tells me that tax reform is very much needed. And I almost feel like bring your charts with us there Thursday night to meet some of the ministers to kind of showcase that, because we have so much to look after. So how do we continue doing that? Well, this is a great way to watch for it, and maybe every time, if there's a time where council wants to start overspending or spending ahead of time, maybe we need to keep popping these charts up. but thank you. I think it's great, but really I do hope the staff are really, you know, thinking about that Ernst & Young report and the recommendations going forward, just in case maybe there is opportunity. And I do wonder if there's opportunity to sell assets for more money now than before because of property assessments going up. So just some thoughts to throw out there.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Hickey, any questions or comments? Her worship's working on her internet connection.
Oh, okay. Nothing specific for me, Chair, beyond, you know, I hope that we take this as an opportunity to kind of, I think it's a really important step to take these opportunities to make assessments of what our asset inventory looks like, and make sure that we're being prudent enough as an organization to deal with that and map out what that long-term strategy is in dealing with those infrastructure deficits. And at the same time, making sure we're not overextending ourselves in the new investment areas and new infrastructure investment areas, so that we can, at the end of the day, make sure that we're maintaining what we have. It seems like we're on the right track with the leadership we have, from Samir, from Mike, from Brent in these categories and beyond, and the rest of the staff involved. So I think it's in good shape based on that. Obviously, some of the numbers are a little worrying in here, and some of the grades are not exactly what I think everyone around this table would hope them to be. but it seems to me like the roadmap is clear in how we address that and how we make sure that we're doing continuing to do a better job in maintaining what we have.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor. Mayor Reardon?
Thank you so much. My internet is sort of freezing and going out, so it's directed me to shut off my camera, so I've done that. It's still not great. But anyways, I'm very happy to get the report. I think it's important for us to have it periodically so we know where we are. It does seem, looking at it historically, like we're on the right track. I found it a very interesting report, and we do have a lot of assets at the end of the day, but you know, we're just moving forward with all that, and we've got that in our budget, our one of our we are looking at that to make sure that we have 80% that will go into renewal versus capital. So I think it's a good news story for me. I was surprised, I will say, to see. I still find it confusing, and not confusing, but in a way, like, you know, you've got the water, and then you've got, you know, the general fund, the water fund. One has, you know, a higher deficit, but you know, it's got the 14% versus 5%. So it's I don't know. I guess I'll have to leave it up to our CFO to decide how we chase it all. But I am happy to get the report. Appreciate everything. And the 80,000 records of assets. Yikes! It's quite a project to put together. So thanks to staff as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, actually, to follow up on a couple of points that you made, there's some big scary numbers in here, but the trend is positive, and we are, you know, since we started gathering data, creating policies based on data, following those policies, this is another indicator that we are becoming stronger financially. Thank you so much for the explanation on sewer separation. Being a teacher, I was trying to take numbers and turn them into letter grades, and it was tough when I saw the C+ and the B, but now it makes a whole lot of sense with the sewer separation, or combined sewers, I guess. And I guess, you know, really it segues, this is a receive and file, but it segues well into what is allowing us to discuss changing the capital budget policy from 85-15 to 80-20 as far as renewal and new infrastructure, because we are trending in the right direction in the SOTI report. Commissioner McGovern, a couple of wrap-up thoughts.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just in terms of maybe touching on some of the points that were made, looking at assets when they do come up at end or near end of life, you know, and assessing whether or not they're continuing to bring value to the community is important. That's something we need to continue to do. Is it an asset that is valued by the community and brings value? And when we build it, can we build it in such a way that, you know, reduces or extends the asset life and maybe the need for reinvestment in the shorter term. And then also, you know, we do have before you tonight a 2-year capital program with the intention of going to a longer 10-year capital program. And so that will help also shape you know, the future as it relates to infrastructure and planning and looking at those assets that are in the critical condition, and then also seeking to leverage funding opportunities for each of them so that we're leveraging dollars from others as we replace them strategically. And then also, as was mentioned in terms of, you know, as we're building new, you know, looking at that, it's interesting when you think of the general fund's ability to pay versus the utility and the amount of revenue that's brought into the general fund versus the utility, yet the sustainable funding requirements are about the same, even though the general fund brings in a whole lot more money than the utility. So just some additional comments and thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. With that, I will take a motion. The recommendation is to receive and file.
I'll move receive and file.
Thanks, Your Worship. Seconded by Councillor Radwin. All in favor, signify
Aye.
or wave. Thanks. Contrary minded? And carried. Thanks very much. Good news. Moving on to 6.2. 6.2, over to CFO Fudge.
Technology working better. Thanks. Yeah, good afternoon, Chairman Sullivan, members of the Finance Committee. Capital budget policy. We indicated at our last Finance Committee meeting that the long-term financial plan is a living document, and the policies are living documents per se, and they're reviewed annually, determine whether any changes are required, whether best practices are evolving. This is another example of that this evening. You just heard a presentation on the 2022 State of the Infrastructure Report. As we discussed, it's evidence-based information, it's condition of our infrastructure, it's risk-based, risk-managed, and it's also important for the community as it focuses on the levels of services these assets provide the community. We don't need assets if they're not providing valued services to the community. So the purpose of the capital budget policy is to ensure that the capital budget investments we make and the decisions we make are always evidence-based, conforming with best practices and conforming with asset management policies. And the policy also ensures that we prioritize our capital investment decisions based on this risk-based approach, and it also ensures that it aligns with our long-term strategic objectives in our financial plan or strategic plans. Otherwise, in other words, we fix the roof before we buy new living room furniture, as we stated in the financial plan. So 3 key changes you'll see in this proposed recommended update. First and foremost, the policy, as was before, included thresholds for investment in capital renewal versus investment in new infrastructure or new investments. This is based on our State of the Infrastructure Report. The general fund and the utility fund have very different investment needs, as you just saw, and as such, in this policy update, we've actually separated the thresholds for the general fund apart from the thresholds required in the utility fund. So that's the first key change you'll notice in the policy. Second, given the improvement in the general fund infrastructure deficit from the last State of the Infrastructure Report, we did feel comfortable in requesting a modification of the threshold from current 85-15 in the policy to an 80-20 split. So 80% renewal, capital renewal, 20% new. Given the significant investments still required to address the utility fund infrastructure deficit, we are recommending that we maintain a 90% capital renewal and 10% new split for the utility fund. Now, you may be wondering, based on that last presentation, why the general fund would be improved to an 80-20 with a grade of a C+, and the utility fund being maintained at 90-10 with a grade of B in that report. However, as Mr. McGovern just indicated, we do need to determine affordability, consider affordability, and the relative size of the general fund as is compared to the utility program when setting these thresholds. So just for an example, you saw in that last presentation, the required annual spend for the general fund on average was approximately about $25 million. And you'll see, and you'll notice in this capital program and previous capital programs, the general fund capital program is typically somewhere between $25 and $30 million. This year happens to be on average around $32, $33 million in the program we have before you this evening. However, a stark difference when looking at the utility fund that requires, based on the SOTI report, around $27 million per year in annual investment. But the capital program, the utility fund, is somewhere between $6 to $10 million per year. So given the difference in the capacity between the two funds, we feel very confident and comfortable with the recommendation that we're making in this policy with the splits and thresholds that you have before you. So finally, before we clarified the definition, the last change is we clarified the definition of capital renewal in the policy as being defined as assets that are at the end of its useful life and contribute to the city's infrastructure deficit. We did that very deliberately because there was some confusion as to whether just simple renewal on any capital investment that we currently own justified it as being renewal. Whereas the intention of this policy isn't for that. The intention is that we divert funds to assets that are at the end of their useful life and they present a risk of service disruption to the community. So we felt it very important to clarify that definition on what capital renewal was and linking that to assets at their end of useful life and infrastructure deficit. So with that, we are recommending the Finance Committee endorse the amendment to the capital budget policy and the policy be brought forward to Common Council for approval. And I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
I'll
Thank you,
move the
Commissioner
recommendation.
Fudge. Thanks, Your Worship. Seconder, and then we'll take questions. Thanks, Councillor Redwin. Questions or comments? Councillor Redwin?
Just had a quick one. I know that at least for the entire financial policy, you need 2/3 of council to approve it. It's not like that for these individual policies. Is it, CFO Fudge, or is it?
No, so it is for these individual policies.
Oh, it is.
So
Okay.
there's an overarching policy. It's called the long-term financial plan policy that council had approved. It's within that long-term financial plan policy that indicates 2/3 approval is required. However, it's also in that policy that permits basically my office to come with recommendations for amendments on policies with respect to best practices. So that's provided in that policy. But if council wanted to actually make changes on their own accord, it would require a 2/3 vote to change those policies.
Okay. No, that's great. I appreciate this. I'm comfortable with this.
Good process question. So when we presumably we refer this on to council, at council, is it a simple majority, or at council is it the 2/3 that's will be required?
I think it would be a simple majority based on it's a recommendation brought forward by my office.
By staff. Okay. No, fair enough. So the motion's on the floor. No further questions do I see. All in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Or a wave. Contrary minded? Unanimously carried. Thanks very much. Another good bit of good news. You know, the fact that being able to put 20% of growth through the general fund capital budget, it's an indicator that things are going well, that we can do that. And because things have been going well, we've been following the financial plan. It will allow us to invest more. So in growth of the city. Fantastic news. So moving on, item 6.3, the draft general fund capital budget. This is a first view for receive and file, and over to CFO Fudge.
Yes, thank you very much. This is the main event of the afternoon, the first exposure of our 2023-2024 general fund, utility fund capital budget programs. I want to highlight a few salient points before I turn the floor over to our controller, Craig Levine, to present the general fund capital program. And then after Craig presents, he'll turn the floor over to the city's chief city engineer, Mike Baker, to present the utility fund program, capital program. But first and foremost, the budget before you are receive and file. There are no decisions to be made this afternoon. Our intention is to provide the draft capital programs to the committee and allow you time to review that program or both programs over the coming weeks prior to revisiting it in September at our next finance committee meeting, and for which we expect to bring some staff recommendations. We are simply looking for feedback from the committee either in today's forum in this meeting or through correspondence over the next few weeks from the finance committee before coming back in September. Second point I want to make is the budgets are as a result of a cross-functional team. So it's not finance putting this capital program before you. It includes staff in your growth service area, your public works and transportation, public safety, utilities, and infrastructure, and feedback from our agency boards and commissions. Third, the capital program before you this evening is a plan that proposes over $90 million in investment between the general fund and the utility fund, while only levering approximately $18 million in new debt for the city. This meets the city's financial plan and our goals for debt management, asset management, and demonstrates fiscal responsibility in leveraging funding from our provincial and federal partners. The fourth point I want to make is the capital program is also subject to change, as there are projects included in the program before you this evening that have already secured funding from other levels of government, but there are also projects that are contingent on obtaining funding from other levels of government that aren't yet secured. When you go through the program, for the general fund, 34% of the budget for the general fund require efforts to secure future funding from other levels of government. and approximately 40% for the utility. So given this fluidity, it's very conceivable that we may have some developments and amendments prior to bringing this back to the Finance Committee in September, and I just wanted to bring that forward for your consideration this afternoon. And any changes that we would be making based on these developments, we would certainly highlight them at our next meeting and fully transparent for the Finance Committee. Finally, we are pleased to advise that the draft capital program is fully compliant with Council's financial policy, including the thresholds for capital renewal versus new, as well as renewal projects being prioritized by our asset management team based on best practices in asset management. So with that introduction, I will turn the floor over to Mr. Levine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Fudge, or CFO Fudge, I guess. I'm just going to share my screen here. And again, thank you, CFO Fudge, and to the members of the Finance Committee. I am pleased to present an overview of the 2023 and 2024 general fund capital budgets. The multi-year budget was compiled with data from our asset management team, which is evidence-based, and ensures alignment with council priorities and several approved plans, particularly the long-term financial plan, and also aligns with relevant financial policies, particularly the updated capital policy. As the Finance Committee just saw with the updated SOTI report and the subsequent recommendation to move capital investments to an 80% renewal and 20% new, the budget was prepared on the basis of this recommended change. The 2-year capital budget will have a city share investment of $5.94 million in new investments and $23.63 million in asset renewal. The overall 2-year capital budget is over $65.8 million, with city share of $29.57 million and other share of $36.25 million. Other share includes funding approved from various federal and provincial programs, funding programs that have been applied for but not yet approved, and transfers from reserves. And to note that only a little less than $18 million is in new debt on a $65 million plus budget. The multi-year budget aligns with the principles of the long-term financial plan. The budget is aligned with reducing the infrastructure deficit. The plan also calls for increasing pay-as-you-go annually by $1 million. New debt has been capped at $9 million each year for 2023 and 2024 to ensure the debt reduction target is achieved. And transfers from reserves will be $4.254 million and $3.25 million, respectively. The city continues to focus on funding opportunities with funding of just over $28.75 million over the 2 years. This leveraged funding has allowed the city to focus on its infrastructure deficit, growth opportunities, climate change initiatives, and various quality of life investments. New projects for the multi-year budget include the following capital projects. There's the reimagination of the Barbers General Store site, continued redevelopment of the Loyalist Plaza site, the transit redesign, as well as the redesign of Main Street to allow for a permanent bike lane. Continue with new investments in 2024. We're looking at the retail drive realignment, which will also fall into 2025. Harbor Passage extensions, again with some more transit redesign, as well as various cycling improvements. Next few slides are going to show how the various capital projects align with council priorities. Under growth, there will be investments in Retail Drive, the Barbers General Store site, Loyalist Plaza, Water Street, South Market Street, St. James Street, as well as Waterloo Street on the corner of Waterloo Street and Cliff Street. These investments will contribute to tax growth, provide opportunities for business to grow, support tourism, and creating a stronger City of St. John brand. Under Move, we have major investments in the redesign of St. John Transit, continued focus on our sidewalks and road renewals. the redesign of Main Street to allow for more active transportation, additions to Harbor Passage, new cycling options, as well as work on Boar's Head Road. These investments offer more travel options for residents, balancing the choices of transportation options for the community and creating a sustainable transit service. Green. Much of the green capital investments is in reinvestments is in storm sewer separations and street reconstructions. The street rebuilds in this budget not only allow for a more resilient infrastructure, particularly adapting to the climate change, but also the investments allow for more growth opportunities, options to change our streetscapes in some of the neighborhoods, and for more active transportation opportunities. There's also continued investments in district energy and deep energy retrofit. But I also want to highlight, as part of the transit redesign, the entire capital budget submission for transit would fall under the the green with the move to electric buses. Also not listed is the opportunities to green our fleet, which is not listed under this category. Under Belong, we have focused investments on park renewals. We have phase 2 of Dominion Park. We have some investments happening at Rockwood Park, playground renewals in Shamrock Park, along with the Carnegie Arts Center, some work done at Marketplace West Ballfield, thus improving the quality of life and cultivating a community pride. These investments will maintain our regional district parks, continue with focusing on enhancing Dominion Park, and improving the various infrastructure related to our parks and playgrounds. Under Perform, these investments strongly align with the asset management data and policies. The investments ensure the city is taking care of its existing assets and working towards reducing infrastructure deficits. Investments include our fleet replacements, which I also have highlighted could have a green component, our IT infrastructure renewal, various facility renewals, including recreation facilities, community centers, along with several traffic light signal replacements that will enhance safety, various traffic management measures, some lift station work, replacing our consoles at the PSCC Center, as well as some capital work to be done on Fallsview Drive. So in conclusion, the capital budget program aligns with our various approved policies, aligns with council priorities, and many of the projects aligning with more than one of those priorities, aligning with the city approved plans, and continued focus and efforts on leveraging funding opportunities, climate change mitigation, reduction of greenhouse gases, quality of life, asset renewal, as well as growth and development opportunities. And with that, the recommendation is that the Finance Committee receive and file the 2023-2024 draft general fund budget as presented, and we will be happy to take any questions from the committee.
Thanks very much, Mr. Levine. It's a great start to the conversation. Questions or comments from committee? Not seeing any. Oh, Councillor Redmond, and then Councillor Hickey.
Yeah, I see Councillor Hickey's got his hand up. Why doesn't he go first, Chair?
Sure. Councillor Hickey?
I can absolutely go first. Thanks, Chair. And I see the mayor's hand up as well. So staff isn't getting off that easy, but it does. So things do look great, and it looks like a lot of great initiatives getting started here in this in these capital investments. I guess just first question, and perhaps I'm not sure if it's finance staff or otherwise that can answer this, but when we're doing these, like just looking at a lot of underground repair, you know, whether it's wastewater or what have you, infrastructure improvements on certain streets. When we're resurfacing those streets afterwards or doing any resurfacing work to them once they're done, are we making considerations for building the whole streets that, you know, we've set priorities on, whether it's adding bike lanes, curb bump outs, things like that? Like, how much of that are we taking into consideration and adjusting those projects accordingly to make sure that happens? I guess the example that comes to mind was a couple of years ago with the reconstruction of Waterloo Street, you know, really seeing it go back in very much the same when I think there was a good opportunity to take advantage of whether it was putting curb bump outs in it to slow traffic along the street, whether it was investing in bike lanes along there to encourage active transportation there, what have you. I'm just wondering how much of that is considered in those not specifically street reconstruction, not specifically resurfacing projects, rather underground infrastructure investments with the reconstruction on top, which Waterloo Street was.
Commissioner McGovern or Mr. Levine, would either of you like to tackle that?
I'll hand that over to Commissioner McGovern.
I also see the city manager has raised his hand. Maybe I'll just offer a few comments. So we do look at that indeed. In fact, there's close coordination between engineering and the Public Works and Transportation, as well as our community, our Growth and Community Services Department, to ensure that plans that have been approved by council are implemented and integrated into the project. For example, the Central Peninsula Plan, Move SJ, the Master Trails Program, all those sorts of things are factored in, and staff would review those before a project would commence, so that it's considered as part of the design. In the case of Waterloo Street, for example, that wasn't a street that was considered to have bike lanes on it under any of those plans. And so it was designed accordingly with the standard that would include, concrete sidewalks and drop curbs for accessibility and a grass median. But in locations where a plan would call for it, then indeed we would incorporate it into the system. But we don't want to be in a position where we develop, a block, for example, and then it doesn't quite connect to anything else as part of the larger undertaking. I'm not sure if there's anything the city manager or anyone else wants to add to that. Thanks.
Mr. City Manager, your hand was up and now it's down.
I guess if I go ahead, City Manager. It's good.
Yeah, I was just going to re-emphasize what Commissioner McGovern mentioned. We do absolutely attempt to link up the underground work with street reconstructions. That is our first priority. It doesn't always happen that way, especially if some of the underground work becomes an emergency. But that is our first priority, to line them up. But street reconstruction does not translate immediately into fully reconstructed streets with active transportation, etc. How much we do in terms of reconstruction very much aligns with both Move SJ and, in the case of the Central Peninsula, the South Central Peninsula Plan. So not every street gets bike lanes and curb outs, but certainly those that merit it in accordance with the other plans would get it as we move forward. Thank you.
Councillor Hickey.
Oh, thanks, Chair. I guess just to that, all I would say is, I'm understanding our bike lane strategy in there as well, and understanding how that works. I just I see those as opportunities whereby if we're resurfacing a little less, but getting a lot more for the community, even whether it's whether it's taking the opportunity while the street's ripped up to put utility lines underground, whether it's taking those opportunities to do those curb bump outs, and making sure that our plans are reflecting that, right? I mean, I see that end of Waterloo Street reconstruction as such an opportunity that I think was missed, to reimagine what that street could look like and take that opportunity. So I guess I just hope that's considered more as opportunities to better define neighborhoods here as we undertake those wastewater infrastructure steps.
Thanks, Councillor.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, just in response, Move SJ is not cast in concrete. We will certainly continue to look at modifications to it in terms of where our bike lanes are, where our bump outs are on sidewalks, etc. But as our traffic engineer often says, it's a balance. As much as all of that is important, so is making sure that vehicular traffic, including commercial traffic, has an ability to work and operate within the city as well. So we continue to try to strike the right balance. I'm not saying we've got it right, and we will continue to modify and amend as required. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Redwin?
Thank you, Chair. I had so many notes on this. I'll try to brief it as much as I can. So, I mean, a big number that I love seeing was a 25% reduction of infrastructure deficit. One thing that I'd like to kind of piggyback a little bit on to what Councillor Hickey was saying, the other part that I'd love to continue, and I know staff are looking at this, but continue reimagining less pavement. More screen space makes people more happy, and you know, obviously we're doing it with Main Street, right? Making it less lanes. We don't need like a highway down Main Street for sure. I was happy to see the finishing off of the Boar's Head Road sidewalk, since especially, I mean, we've even gone into the last council meeting, first and second reading for another building. So since there's been so much development there, that makes sense. And I want us to continue doing what makes sense. So I'll pick on my ward. Not that nobody's going to take it apart, but you know, Champlain Drive, was there a need to have sidewalks on both sides of the road? Maybe not. I mean, on King Street, yes, absolutely. But on Champlain Drive, maybe not. Well, this of course happened a while ago. So, but going forward, when we're imagining the streets, can we have sidewalks just on one side of the road? And then the other thing is, are we going to be able to maintain them in the winter time? Because I'm always concerned, are we going to be able to maintain what we're building, right? Because I mean, that could be 5 months of the year that the sidewalk's not being used because of snow if it's not getting maintained. A couple points I'd like to make. I'm just going to bite the bullet and say it. I love to see our regional partners sharing in on some of these capital costs for places like the Aquatic Center and TD Station. It is drawing a lot of growth, a lot of business into the whole region. And I'd love to see the partnership shift on that, which I know we're still talking about reforms. And the other thing that I'd love to see, and I've mentioned it a few times, but I'll say it again, is I'd love to see the Aquatic Center using that not-for-profit number, much like the Imperial Theatre does with theirs, to do a capital project so that, once again, we're not having to use our funds to substitute for that. Just wondering if staff have, so a couple of questions, just wondering if staff have any thoughts on if we need catch basins around Mcallister Drive. I've had a lot of questions. And, you know, I know that there's been talk about roundabouts at Sims Corner in the airport arterial. So I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot. You don't necessarily need to tell me now, but just a couple of questions that have kind of come up in conversation recently. I don't know if Commissioner Hugenholtz has any thoughts on it now. We can always wait too.
Commissioner Hugenholtz?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I guess there are some intersection improvement projects that we have listed in there. Most of them relate to either provincially or regionally designated highways. That's a program, of course, that we've talked about before, that there's a shared funding arrangement there for road repairs. In this case, we have proposed a couple improvements, including Loch Lomond at the arterial. We have recognized the need for, you know, a roundabout there to deal with the traffic conflicts in that area. It is something I have brought up to DTI in the past, so it's certainly on their radar. We had proposed it as a project under that PDH program, 100% funded by the province.
Wow.
Now the jury is still out on that. We haven't got any official response to our request, but I do recognize that as an issue that we need to deal with. Roundabouts, the other one you mentioned was Sims Corner. That is certainly one that I think you can expect to see come up on our capital plans in future years. There are some other considerations in that area that we need to be in sync with. And exactly how that's going to play out and how that will impact this intersection. We don't have 100% clarity on that yet, but we are looking at it, and I think you'll see it pop up on our capital plans in future. The last one you mentioned was catch basins on Mcallister Drive.
Mhm.
That is built with catch basins. I do know that in several times over the past few years, we've had some maintenance issues with one area in particular near Westmoreland. So we have made some adjustments there. We've actually changed the type of catch basin cover already a couple times, and I guess our crews continue to monitor that. And if there are some further adjustments or repairs necessary, we'll certainly make plans to fix that. Thank you.
That's great news. I see that that you guys are making some changes because there was issues on Bayside Drive, and I got a lot of calls about that too. So I mean, look at that. Like you're on the ball actively trying to go after money all the time. It's wonderful. There's just so much to do, and the city's so big. And so it was great to see about Bayside Drive. Anyway, the only other concern I think that I had, Chair, was as much as we have our Central Peninsula plan, and now we're kind of going to be moving into this North End plan, and it's great to see all these streets being looked after. I know sometimes when there's so many being reconstructed, it can cause some traffic issues and growing pains. So I know that staff are trying to do their best, and hopefully the public will just be patient.
Thanks, Councillor. Sorry, I disappeared for a moment or two there, thanks to wonderful technology. Did you have any questions in the last bit I may have missed?
No, I think that's great. I mean, it's just so great to see staff going after more and more money, and they're getting a lot done.
Thank you. Mayor Reardon, I see your hand.
Thank you so much. Listen, when I read through this, I loved it. I thought it's great that it's over 2 years. I really liked that fact. It aligns with our priorities, and it demonstrates that. I liked that about it. You've got your policies in there, your plans in there, people in there. You've got all the important P's in there. It's leveraging funds still from other levels of government. You got some climate change in there, quality of life, asset renewal, growth and development opportunities. I mean, I thought it was a very strategic budget. So I want to say thank you. I know there's people have questions, and there's all kinds of little operational things there, but overall, and looking at it holistically from a high level, like I said, I thought it was very strategic, and I'm very, very pleased to see it. And when I read it, I thought they really have aligned that budget with the priorities that this council has hammered out. So very pleased to see it. And I want to thank the whole team. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just from my comments, not so as chaired, but just looking at what has been presented, I think it does a good job of not only hitting all of our priorities, but also all of our wards. There are projects going on citywide. It's not focused. No offense, Councillor Hickey, there's been some criticism in the past that we got a whole lot going uptown, and there's still work going uptown, but we're hitting north, south, east, and west. So I think that's important that we recognize the livability and residents citywide.
My ward is very big, Chair. I have east, I have north, and I have west, and I have south. So I'm happy with it all.
Excellent. Just for a few of you have mentioned the fact that it's a 2-year plan, and certainly staff has, which is a change and an improvement for us. It not only will allow us to plan a little more in advance, potentially put tenders out a little earlier to get some advantage there, to be, if it's things that are approved 2 years out, allow staff to keep their eyes out for opportunities for funding partners. And it's part of our transition to our 10-year capital. So all good there. And I think that's really important to highlight. And also my intention for committee following this meeting is to send a note to the rest of our council colleagues to highlight that we've had our first look at the capital 2-year capital budget, and to direct them to give a close look and to have a conversation with committee members. I think our next steps, it will come back to committee after some conversation and potential revision, at which point in time committee will be asked to forward it to council for a receive and file. And so I think it's a good time now to start the conversation. So just to give you a heads up, committee, that I will be volunteering you all for conversations with our council colleagues, so that the first time they're seeing this and conversing about it isn't when it hits the council table necessarily, because this is incredibly important. So with those comments, it is today a receive and file. So I'll take that motion. Councillor Hickey, Councillor Radwin, got in ahead of you there, your worship. All in favor signify.
Aye.
Contrary minded? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 6.4 on our agenda, draft year-to-date results. Over to CFO Fudge.
Thank you very much. Our last item is the presentation from Mr. Levine on the general fund and utility fund year-to-date results. As of the end of July, 7 months in for this year, and a projection of where we currently believe the results will end up by the end of the year. There are several factors that can change the projections over the coming months, including, as you're all aware of, potential supply chain issues, potential weather events, potential COVID impacts, et cetera, and we want the committee to be aware of this. That is 7 months in, there could be changes with respect to future year-end results, but it is our best projection as of this date. The only thing certain in this current economic landscape is uncertainty, and you heard this on council Monday night from some of the developers at the council meeting. So we are pleased to show a presentation that illustrates the city is navigating these uncertain times with projections of favorable variances in both of the year-end projections of the general fund and the utility fund. So with that as the backdrop, I'll turn the presentation over to Mr. Levine. Thank you.
Thank you, CFO Fudge, and through you, Mr. Chair. Actually, we missed a part of the capital presentation with the utility fund. Chief Engineer Baker was going to present that, so if it's all right with you, we'll jump back a half a step and talk about replacing some vintage pipes or something like that in the ground.
My apologies. I was all so excited about the 2-year general fund capital, I forgot about Abraham Lincoln's pipes. Yeah, certainly we got to circle back.
Of that.
All right. Good afternoon. The proposed 2023 and 2024 utility fund capital budgets are aligned with council's priorities, asset management plan, capital budget policy, the Central Peninsula Neighborhood Plan, and the budgets prepare the utility to adapt to climate change, support development, and the renewal of infrastructure for reliable service delivery. The 2023 and 2024 utility capital budgets were prepared with input from the senior leadership team, engineering, public works and transportation services, growth and community services, strategic services to ensure it supports growth. The total proposed 2023 and 2024 capital utility budgets are just over $28.2 million. The utility share for the funding is slightly over $9.9 million, with all of the funding coming from the operating budget. In addition to the $9.9 million coming from residential customers, $1.135 million of the overall budgets will be paid by industry. To put it another way, 35.1% of the overall budgets would be coming from residential customers, 4% of the overall budgets would be coming from industry, and the remainder, 60.9%, we are hopeful would be coming from other levels of government. St. John Water has received or is seeking funding for over $17.6 million of funding from the programs listed on the slide. So to recap, there is no borrowing with the 2023 or 2024 utility capital budgets that are before you, but it should be noted that one of the key projects, the reconstruction of essential pipework at the Lancaster Lagoon, is contingent upon significant funding, which is approximately $2 million, where we are seeking this funding from the bilateral program. If the funding is not awarded, the project still needs to be completed, and we will have to look at the utility using reserves to complete this work. The draft utility capital budgets focus solely on asset renewal due to the utility's sizable infrastructure deficit. The utility will be investing in climate change through the retrofit of 3 existing lift stations to allow important components to be raised above flood levels and ensure reliable collection of wastewater, as well as investments at the Lancaster wastewater treatment facility to repair and raise the berm surrounding the facility in accordance with the council-approved climate change and adaptation plan. In addition, the Milledgeville wastewater treatment facility will start the design process for a new UV system, which will be constructed above projected St. John River flood elevation. This work is essential to continue to meet our regulatory requirements. Many of the projects proposed in the draft 2023-2024 utility capital budgets are full street reconstruction and infrastructure renewal in accordance with the approved funding programs. These proposed projects will allow the utility to separate old combined sewers into separate sanitary and storm sewers, as well as renew aging water mains, better preparing the city for growth and development. All of these renewals would be completed while aligning with the general fund's proposed investments in beautification of neighborhoods, active transportation, and greening opportunities. There are other less significant projects included in the draft 2023 and 2024 utility capital budgets before you on this slide. With that, I would recommend that the Finance Committee receive and file the 2023 and 2024 draft utility fund budgets as presented. Thank you, and if there's any questions, I'll pass it back to Chairman Sullivan.
Thanks, Mr. Baker, for the presentation. Any questions on that? Thanks, Your Worship. Moved. A seconder, Councillor Radwin. Any questions for Mr. Baker with regards to the utility capital? Right, seeing none, it is a receive and file. Move to receive and file. It's on the floor. So all in favor? Aye. Contrary minded? Thanks, team. Carried. Mr. Levine, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, as CFO Fudge alluded to, here to present the July 31st unaudited financial results for the general fund and the utility fund. As everyone is fully aware, with the effects of inflation, fuel costs, supply chain issues, rising interest rates, it is important to continually monitor and pivot as needed to deal with these budgetary pressures. The focus at this time is on the July year-to-date results in order to understand the impacts of some of these challenges. And I'm pleased to say for the end of July, the general fund is showing a positive variance of $1.384 million. But I also want to note as I walk through the presentation, a theme of surpluses and wages and benefits is largely due with vacancies and some recruitment challenges. And you're going to see that in various service areas. So the general fund, the general fund is pretty much on budget when it comes to revenues, with 488,000 plus surplus or positive variance to budget for July. The majority of the surplus is a result of increases in our permit revenues, accommodation levies, as well as seeing some increases in parking revenues. So for growth and community, year to date has a negative variance of 186,000 year to date. There are multiple budget lines that are over and under budget, and the overall list of the major variances are timing, and some examples are listed on this slide. Public Works and Transportation is negative 791,000 variance year to date. Very, very similar to our last reporting period. It was really the cost of the winter season that is driving the variance, along with our fuel costs. Public Safety Services, which includes our fire, police, and PSCC, has a positive variance of just over 887,000 year to date. Again, wages and benefits are a huge driver of the surplus, but the surplus in the goods and services are really around some of the timing issues on procuring some of our goods and services, particularly in police for vehicles. Utilities and Infrastructure has a small positive variance of just over $36,000 year to date. And again, GIS is probably the biggest driver of the variance and is due really to the timing of their ESRI licensing fee. Strategic Service, year to date, positive variance of just over $291,000. They are under budget in several areas in their goods and services, such as professional services, repairs and maintenance, and that is offset with our rising cost of insurance. Corporate Services has a year-to-date positive variance of just over $500,000. And again, a large portion of the variance relates to budgeted funds for potential arbitration costs that have been avoided, as well as some minor variances in other line items. Other charges are what you know as fiscal charges. Year to date has a positive variance of just over $157,000. And this is a result of special pension payments a bit lower than our year to date budget. St. John Water, again, their year to date figure shows a positive variance of $1.9 million for the period ending of July. Revenue year to date, for the most part, is on budget and has a positive variance of just over $120,000. Meter revenues continue to recover, and we are optimistic that it will continue throughout the year. And the industrial meter is under budget year to date. However, that's just really a timing issue around billings. Year to date expenses for July is 1.796 positive variance. As you can see, goods and services are making up the majority of that positive variance. Variances, there are multiple items that are causing the variance. Variance includes $600,000 related to the timing of the invoices for the treatment plant, as well as challenges obtaining some supplies and procuring services. And I'll give meter purchasing as well as some of the engineering services as an example. So in conclusion, the service areas are addressing the various pressures, examples, inflation of fuel, and are confident that these risks can be managed for the balance of the year. Staffing shortages and recruitment will continue for the foreseeable future as positions become vacant. Along with these external pressures already discussed, the upcoming winter season can be another budget pressure depending on what Mother Nature decides to throw at us. And with that, the recommendation is to receive and file this report as presented, and certainly address any questions the committee has for us.
Thanks, Mr. Levine. Questions from the committee, Councillor Radwin.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd just like to thank City Manager and CFO Fudge and the whole team for really managing their budget well. And it is a time where all of a sudden prices keep going up and you almost can't keep track of how fast some things are going up. So I think you've done a great job. I do have a couple of questions. For public safety, I'm just wondering if we are accounting for like back pay that would end up happening from their contract negotiations in our budget yet.
I can speak on that. So for the police, that has been accounted for, and any retroactive pay has been allocated accordingly. So for fire, that will occur likely in August. Any retro pay will be paid out, and money set aside will reverse and offset that previous year payouts.
Any thoughts? Do you think it'll kind of balance itself out, or will we?
We're very confident that we had enough put aside for that. Yes.
Okay, that's wonderful. And I'm also just wondering this, I mean, I totally appreciate that it's probably a huge challenge, but with snow, obviously it's a big challenge in general, but even ordering salt, like I'm just wondering, Commissioner Hugenholtz, is there any kind of plan this year to order more or order earlier? I mean, I think that you did it, if I remember right, I think this was something that the bid went out quite early, I think last year, but maybe we just needed more than what we had. Just wanted to get your thoughts about that.
Yeah, certainly the cost of road salt is a significant part of our winter management budget. We did have some challenges last winter, or rather, I guess the first part of the winter in this year. With keeping up with supply, there were times when our stockpiles were getting a little low, and there were, our supply, basically our trucks were lining up and waiting for hours, multiple hours in line to try and get a little bit of salt to us. So we have taken a little bit of a different approach, and we're going into this winter season, or will be, with our salt sheds fully stocked. And it's our intent to make sure that we keep an eye on that and don't let the stockpiles get anywhere close to low. So we want to make sure we have enough on hand to deal with whatever the winter throws our way. So that has pushed a little bit more of the expenses into this fiscal year, but it won't actually result in any additional spending over the longer term.
And I have one other question for you. Did you find, like, I think there was some scheduling changes that you guys did that would have impacted snow removal? Did it seem to have a better effect on not having to get into overtime?
Well, we certainly have adjusted our resource levels over the last number of years. So, and essentially what we did was we kind of did more balancing our shifts between the day shift and the night shift. What that allowed us to do was provide a consistent level of service over the 24-hour period. And it also allowed us to basically optimize the use of our existing equipment. So those were, some ways that we were able to manage within the budget constraints that we were experiencing. That does mean somewhat of a reduction in our surge capacity. But overall, we found that worked okay. Now, it's always difficult to predict what the next winter will throw our way. Certainly this past winter, every storm seemed to come on a weekend or a Friday night into Saturday when we don't have any regular scheduled employees in. So that can drive overtime costs. Now, I think we are safe assuming that the distribution of storms is going to be more random than that over the longer term. So we certainly hope that we schedule the storms in a little bit better next time. But our forces are ready to go. We do have the systems in place to call people in when we need them, and certainly prepared to do that for the rest of the year.
Well, if you could predict the weather, then you'd be making some unbelievable money. And I mean, obviously, you kind of see the fuel prices caused an impact, and you know what? Every single resident has felt that impact. So anyway, I think you guys have done a great job, and Commissioner Hugenholtz sounds like some good continuous improvements on your end. So great news. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just briefly, you mentioned fuel price. So if I may, Mr. Chair, we do have various fleet policies to allow us to manage that as best we can. We have an idling policy against long hauling. So we do receive regular reports on that, and that does, inform our discussions with our crews. So we want to make sure we limit the usage of fuel, but of course it is driven by the number of winter storms that we get, which is out of our control. And it's also driven by the unit prices we're paying at the pump. So our focus is on basically we manage what we can control and we try and keep an eye on what we can't. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, some nice green policies. Thank you. That's great.
Thank you, Councillor Redmond. Any other questions or comments on the year-to-date results?
I do see the city manager as his hand up, Chair.
Oh, thanks, Councillor Hickey. I'm gonna need to push another button. Mr. City Manager, go ahead.
Your Chair and members of committee, Commissioner Hugenholz stole a bit of my thunder, but I think it bears repeating. Almost every winter storm this year was on a Friday or Saturday, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that. And I would just like to personally commend and thank the entirety of our public works team for not only responding to the storms and with the increased pressures of overtime, etc., still being able to effectively manage their budget to the excellent levels that you see before you in the year-to-date results. It could have been far worse had the diligence, preparation, and thoughtfulness of that entire team not be as evident as it was. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. City Manager. Yeah, just for me, from the 40,000 foot level, with all of the inflationary supply chain, everything, economic pressures that are currently being felt in the world, to our entire team, because you know, I know CFO Fudge will say it if I don't. This current financial stability that we have is the result of the work across the organization. So certainly thank you very much to our staff across the organization for maintaining our fiscal discipline and making sure that we are staying on the road that we need to be on, that we're following our financial plans, and that we're keeping things under control when a whole lot of things are going out of control. So just kudos, very good work. Fingers crossed that we're able to continue it, and we have some weekday storms in this coming winter. This is also a receive and file. So I'll take a motion for receive and file. Councillor Radwin, Councillor Hickey, all in favor, signify. Opposed and carried. CFO Fudge, anything else we need to add before we wrap up?
That's all, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, so just before I take a vote. Yep, go ahead, Councillor Redmond.
Great. I see the city manager's hand still, but I don't know if he had anything else.
Mr. City Manager, do you have more or just stick?
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I just failed to knock it down.
Thanks. Yeah, just a quick fun summary. We looked at our state of the infrastructure report, which C+, B-, we're passing. We've got work to do, but trending upwards. And as things are improving there, it's allowed us to recommend a change to our capital budget policy, which will have 80% in renewal and 20% in new growth projects under the capital. Incredibly important, the 2-year capital budget that was presented to us is suggesting we borrow $18 million to get $90 million worth of investment across capital budgets. Fantastic work done by our team to find partners. And really, thank you also so much to the other levels of government. Much of that rest of the money is thanks to our partners at the province and thanks to our federal partners. Incredibly important, you know, for all of us local politicians, we all serve the same crew, whatever level we're at. And this is a wonderful example of those partnerships coming together to serve our citizens. So thank you to the province and to the feds. And finally, good news across the organization that our staff are keeping track of where we are with all the inflationary pressures that we have to keep us on budget. Really, that is great news in these times. And with all of that, and the big thank you also to committee. I know this is the funnest committee to be on. I'll take a motion to adjourn. Councillor Hickey, Councillor Radwin, all in favor. Thanks very much, team. Enjoy what's left of our summer, and we'll see you again as Finance Committee in about a month, I think.
Have a good day.
Have a good day, everyone.
Everybody.